What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy, Dead on Dave. And yes, the picture you're seeing and the title that you read is correct. I am going to talk about CTE and the lawsuit and all that stuff that's happening right now in the wrestling world with it. Now, I know that's not everyone's bag, and I also know that because I think this latest lawsuit is shit, which I do, it's going to be viewed as me standing up for WWE, which is really not the case. I want to make it very clear, the point of this video and my stance is standing up for the life of contact and combat sports, which I think is constantly under attack and by very ambiguous and subjective laws that really don't have enough scientific merit to properly back them up, let alone make judicial fucking judgments that could potentially cripple an industry, a company, an organization, whatever the case may be. That's what I am talking about here. Now, I'm going to have to use some personal experiences and my opinions on the matter to try and make that all congeal properly. And that is what this video is going to be about. So strap in, strap on. Let's get into it. Because the first thing I got to talk about is I can't deny that this is a hot button subject for me personally. I was in the Army. As many of you guys know, I was in for 10 years. I did serve in combat. I suffered 3 diagnosed concussions while overseas. While not in combat, I was diagnosed with at least one other, and I was suspected to have another while playing sports while in the Army. Before my Army days as a teenager, when I played sports in high school, I had 2 diagnosed concussions and probably a few more that never got checked out. So conservatively, I'm in double digits for lifetime concussions, which I know probably explains a lot if you've been watching this channel for a while. You're like, oh, that's what's wrong with him. Yeah, okay. So, hey, one mystery solved. But it also explains why it's a hot button subject for me. I have fear of CTE. I have fear of a lot of things. Let's talk about CTE on its own for a second, because a lot of people are very confused about CTE. They don't really know what it is, man. And that's really because nobody knows what it is. It's still being researched. There's nothing that is concrete on any of it. There are so many myths, so many things that are just not solid. You can't possibly make 100% judgments on these things because there's no way to. Not when you don't have all the information. And it's because it's the brain. You can't properly diagnose CTE or a lot of brain injuries or diseases until after death. And CTE falls in that category. Here's what we know. It appears to come from repetitive brain trauma. It appears to be a genetic predisposition disease. So while we just said it appears to have repetitive brain trauma, you can't take out the genetic predisposition part of it either. There's not enough research to figure out exactly if anybody who doesn't ever do a contact sport is going to get it anyway because their dad and their dad and their dad had it. You know, it's very, very difficult. And because of the fact that it can only be diagnosed after death, makes it even harder. CTE is distinctly different from any other form of dementia, most notably Alzheimer's disease. It's so different, and there's no effective treatment for any neurodegenerative disease, let alone CTE. That's what makes it so scary. And the fact that very common symptoms of aging and what a lot of people have always referred to as midlife crisis or, early onset dementia or so many things are associated with CTE, like memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control, aggression, depression, and then full-fledged dementia. Fuck, I have all of those. I have every single one of those. I've had so many fucked up things, so it all hits home with me very hard. So here's the thing. It's also shown up in people that have avoided contact activities. So there's not enough information to properly judge anything, let alone award millions and in some cases billions one day probably of dollars to people who came before when that information was not available for the mass consumption. Nobody knew. The stuff wasn't being researched. So to say that it's 100% on WWE is not fair at all, let alone the fact that WWE is not the only wrestling industry. We're going to get into all that in just a minute. I know a lot of things that I've said are scary as shit. They're terrifying, and I get that. And it's undisputable. But how much of it truly is WWE's fault? Because that's what this lawsuit's about. Fault and money. And when you look at the list of people on this list, in the lawsuit, this latest lawsuit by WWE, which I probably should have said at the beginning of the video, which I don't think I did. This is about this latest lawsuit with WWE. This lawsuit with the WWE that has just been released. A whole bunch of wrestlers have filed a suit with the same lawyer who keeps filing these suits that always get thrown out. Now they filed a massive suit, and there's a huge list of names. So when you look at this list of names, okay, it becomes obvious to me that there's some problems with this. Because virtually everyone on this list falls into one of these categories. They're either a former wrestler that has had a very public falling out with WWE, a wrestler that simply did not make a whole lot of money in wrestling and is still having to perform or recently stopped performing in and outside of WWE, or spent most of their careers outside of WWE and suffered extreme damages of their own. Look at some of the names on this list. I mean, first, there's going to be a lot that you do not recognize, and that's okay. Not everybody does. But there's not a whole lot of heavy hitter earners, especially when you consider that this is a WWE specific lawsuit. They're not suing wrestling because you can't sue wrestling. You're going to sue the big dog. And I get the reason to do that. They're the big dog. They have the money, so you sue them. But that doesn't mean that just because they're the big dog and they had the money, that all the people on this list can point to fucking WWE and say, you're culpable for my pain and suffering. That's not really fair, especially in a choice-based industry like WWE. I think it's very disingenuous of anybody on this list, especially ones like Marty Jannetty, who still performs. A whole lot of these guys still perform. They're on the independent circuit. They're working conventions. They're in gyms. They're still doing this and putting themselves through physical torment, but yet they're saying wrestling ruined their lives. But that's the thing. They're not really saying wrestling ruined their lives. They're saying WWE ruined their lives, which is very unfair. And I'm going to give you a big reason as to why in a moment. Look, if I don't think I have a semblance of a point here, if you don't think that I'm making any type of point, that's fine. But I think it's more about the one name that's not on this list that really does tell the story. It's a name that could easily be on this list. The guy that's missing most notably, and the guy who would really change the narrative of this list, is a WWE Hall of Famer. He is one of WWE's biggest critics. He's had bad blood personally with Vince McMahon. More than anyone, you could really make the argument. Certainly anyone else on this list. Was seriously injured in the ring. In fact, by a concussion that ended his career. And he's also lost a family member in a WWE ring. Of course, I'm talking about Bret Hart. Why isn't Bret's name on this list? Huh? Somebody answer me that. Why isn't he on this list? It would make all the sense in the world if it was. Most people would take the lawsuit much more seriously if this man was the main face behind it. He certainly has a case. I think more than anyone else on this list. If he presented a lawsuit on WWE, I think a lot of people would go, oh, this makes a lot more sense. And he certainly has an axe to grind. He's one of the bitter Brett. Everybody talks about bitter Brett. But yet, no hitman. Why? I think there's a few reasons. First, Brett is wrestling. He was born in it. It's probably hereditary. He knows the ins and outs, and more importantly, the dangers of the sport. Why does he know? Why does he understand? Why does he accept that getting hit constantly in the head causes issues? Because he watched his father's health get worse and worse over the years. He knew his future. He accepted it because he loves this industry. Because that's who he is. Bret Hart is wrestling. For any disagreements I have with how fundamentally Bret looks at the industry or the criticisms that he has, or do I feel he's overrated? All that's irrelevant. Bret is wrestling. Bret Hart is the Wayne Gretzky. He's the Gordie Howe. He is Mr. Wrestling. He is. I think the second reason is Bret understands the same thing I do. These lawsuits are dangerous, man. They're overblown, they're overused, and at the moment, 100% subjective. There's no concrete proof that you can point to say this and this and this and this 100%. There's not. If there was, more of these lawsuits would be coming to pass. There's simply not enough data to thoroughly prove under the law that WWE is the sole culprit responsible and thus should foot the bill. Now, before you go rushing to the NFL ruling as a comparison, I want to point out that is a completely different situation that more than likely also will get overturned through time. When it goes to the Supreme Court and such, it might get overturned. There's a very good possibility because of some of the subjectivity. But also, the WWE or the NFL is unionized, which WWE is not. It's also a much more violent sport where the risk factor is much more deadly. I mean, like it's more dangerous in so many ways. And there's been independent research on the NFL's impact, in particular football's impact on people, and they've gone to be able to take precautions against it, which wrestling can't do. Can't wear helmets in the ring. You can wear helmets. You can make advancements in sports science in the football that you can't do in wrestling. So there's completely different. There's completely different situations, and there's enough culpability against the NFL, at least at the time being, to have that ruling. There's not that with WWE, at least not to my knowledge. All this brings me to the third point, and maybe the most important. Bret has money, lots and lots of money. And that's where this lawsuit really takes a turn for the ugly. Most of these guys just simply don't have a lot of money. And they've had to stay on the indie circuit long after their WWE days, and in some cases before, to survive financially. The things they have to subject their body to is much more dangerous on that stage, but that's not going to get brought up in these lawsuits because it doesn't damn WWE. It damns their life choices, which is a much different thing. If you have to take personal responsibility, this lawsuit's dead. So they're not going to take personal responsibility. They're going to throw as much shit at WWE as humanly possible. That's the point. The reality is not everyone makes the same amount in wrestling, just like in other sports. In wrestling, for the most part, you make based on how big of a draw you are. And the reality is many of these guys, not all, simply weren't that big of draws. And they did not make the money they needed, wanted, or felt they were worth. Thus, they had to put a lot more strain on their bodies out of necessity in most cases. And most of these guys didn't exactly have backup skills to lean on. And none of these guys were able to just go right into engineering or anything. No, they chose wrestling. They chose it. They love it. Wrestling to this day is still on the fringe. It's a hard life and it's not suitable for everybody. Many people in wrestling, especially in the eras past, had loner or outsider personalities not conducive to work environments, to regular everyday work environments. Simply put, there's always been a number of people in society that runs away to join the circus, which is exactly what WWE was, and will always be. The WWE isn't perfect by any stretch. We all know that, not just creatively, but as a business. There's still some very fringy, very dirty things that go on that most people are fairly sure about. But seemingly, they have learned a great deal from their past. I mean, look how they deal with athletes now. They deal with wrestlers as athletes. Like, they take care of them in a way that has never been done in wrestling before. It may not still be as good as it should, but it's still pretty goddamn fantastic. The level of care that they do is it's pretty crazy, you know? And yes, it was created out of self-service. They wanted to keep their money coming in. They wanted to keep their business thriving. But honestly, I don't have a problem with that as long as these guys get taken care of, because that's all that matters. Wrestlers have better care now than they used to. That's the reality of the situation. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Now, does that mean that wrestlers of the past should be forgotten? Of course not. But a blanket lawsuit that will just cripple the fucking industry and help bring an end, or at least further the end, of combat and contact sports is not the way. Now, if you want to talk about the way to properly mitigate this, not fix, because there is no fixing, the WWE should be held accountable in this regard. They should either do it on their own, or they should be forced to finance a startup foundation that is a nonprofit that generates money through fan conventions and any other way that wrestlers of eras past make money. And these conventions should be what funnels into, or at least a percentage of it, funnels into money that is raised solely for the care of these older wrestlers. Solely for that reason. That's the proper way. Look, not to put more money in their pockets because they feel that they should have earned money in their wrestling careers, which is really what a lot of these guys are saying in their lawsuits. That's what they feel. They should have been bigger stars, but WWE held them down, and then they had brain surgery, and they had brain injuries, and they couldn't work, and they couldn't live, and they couldn't love. It's all bullshit. Because the reality is, you make what you make in the industry, and the people running the business is going to push the people that do, that make the money, that put the butts in the seats. That's not an easy pill for anybody to swallow. It's just not. It's hard. So any money that's generated through any foundation that the WWE were to make, either through being required to do so by law or doing it on their own volition, which I believe they should, it should be solely to maintain and help care for these retirees, for these old. They need a pension. They need something to make sure their lives are not shit. And that's what WWE needs to make. And here's the thing. They're not thinking in those terms because of all the strides they've made now. And the guys that are entering their late 30s and 40s are simply not having these same worries, man. They've been taken care of better. They're going to be taken care of better. They made a hell of a lot more money. So they're going to be able to take care of themselves better. This is a tough situation. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to talk about on this show, because there's so much ambiguity. There's so much subjectivity. And I know a lot of people might rip me over this video, and they might come back at me with a whole bunch of what they think are facts, but not knowing and not understanding is not an excuse to attack. It's not an excuse to shut down, and it's not a good enough reason to end an industry. And neither is jealousy. Neither is jealousy. Neither is being a jilted lover. Neither is any of those reasons. So that's my take on it, man. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you throw a like down at some point, and also subscribe to the channel if you've yet to do so. We're much more levity based here most of the time, and I'm sorry this was kind of a morose video, but I hope you found some entertainment in any way, and maybe it provoked a little bit of thought. Love to have a debate with you guys. Love to hear what you guys have to think about it. Go ahead and hit me up in the comment section below, or on Twitter at DeadOnDaveV. Thank you guys very much for joining me right here on Dead on Dave Productions. And as always, like, subscribe, and share. And if you don't have talent, have talented friends. We'll see you next time. Peace.